In Chapter 2 of the JoJo Lands, Jodio reveals that he was basically diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder by his school counselor. I've already talked a bit about his personality in another video, but a few of you wanted me to go a little more in-depth on his diagnosis, and I actually wanted to as well because I think the psychology of fictional characters can be really interesting to analyze and discuss. But before I go on with the video, I want to make it clear that I am not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so legally I cannot diagnose anyone with anything. I'm not trying to, and I don't want any of you trying to use this video to diagnose yourself or one of your friends either, okay? Cool. Now let's have fun with the rest of the video. When you think about characters that are shown to have ASPD in the media, who are some of the popular ones that come to mind? Patrick Bateman from Psycho, Lou Bloom from Nightcrawler. I think Dio is a character who's coded to have it as well.
Why did you do that? What was that for?
They demonstrate all sorts of possible behaviors that people with ASPD can show, like treating relationships as transactional, lacking empathy, or having an inflated self-image. One thing that all three of these characters have in common is that they are very cold, calculating, and unfortunately, violent individuals. But it is really important to point out that just because someone has ASPD doesn't mean they are automatically this type of person. Right now, you're probably wondering, hey, but what does this have to do with Jodio? Well, I'm glad you asked. Sit tight for just a little longer, we're getting there. In order to be diagnosed with ASPD, you have to meet several criteria that you can find in this handy-dandy handbook. The DSM-5 is a reference book of mental health conditions and disorders. It's used by mental health professionals all over the world to help diagnose their clients. And again, because I'm not a licensed professional, anything I say in regard to Jodio's diagnosis is coming straight from this book. The entry for antisocial really drives home the point that you can only officially receive this diagnosis if you are an adult. You have to be at least 18 years old, and our newest Joestar, Jodio, is only 15, so by definition, he cannot have ASPD. I'm honestly not sure if there's an official reason for this, but some say it's because the brain hasn't finished developing until a certain age, and others think that this is just a serious diagnosis to give a kid. The stigma surrounding it can be pretty damaging to the self-image, and teenagers honestly already have enough destroying theirs for them. Like it or not, the media plays a major role in shaping our perception of the things we have little personal experience with, and drama tends to hold our attention way better than mundane reality. Because of this, I think how Jodio's mom reacts is a pretty realistic example of how a parent might react after receiving this news, especially when they don't have an understanding of what it could mean. Barbara Ann is devastated, and even lashes out at his counselor when she's told Jodio's results. I think it's funny that her reaction is kind of justified, just not for the reasons that she thinks. She doesn't know that her son is technically being misdiagnosed. Yes, teens can still demonstrate antisocial behaviors, and Jodio might even be doing that in the first 2 chapters, but the diagnosis that people his age receive instead is called conduct disorder. This is really all I wanted to say in my first video, but I didn't want to seem nitpicky, and here I am now making an entirely new video about it. I don't speak Japanese, and who knows when the official translations are coming to the West, but I did read 3 separate fan translations and they all say the same thing. I tend to be a really forgiving person when it comes to fiction and errors like this. I'm not the type of guy who would watch Avengers and say their math on the time traveling formula was wrong. Maybe in this world where people have punch ghosts and dudes can turn into rocks, kids can have antisocial. Whatever. But I have to admit, when I read through it the first time, I got a little smirk on my face and thought to myself, do they know? Okay. What is conduct disorder? It can be a precursor to antisocial. Kids and teens that have conduct disorder have a much higher chance of being diagnosed with ASPD as adults, but it isn't a guarantee. Based off the criteria for conduct disorder, Jodio does kind of fit the bill. The most essential feature of it is a repetitive and persistent pattern of behavior in which the rights of others or major age-appropriate societal norms or rules are violated. This is the very first criteria, and it's typically shown in the following ways: aggression towards people and animals, destruction of property, deceitfulness or theft, and serious violation of the rules. Starting with the most serious one first. He does demonstrate some aggressive behavior in the beginning of chapter 1, but self-defense or defense of others is usually not counted towards this. However, there is a point in the confrontation where Dragona has to pull Jodio away from the cops that he's thrashing, because he thinks Jodio is starting to take things a little too far. It seems cruel because they're defenseless after he uses his stand, but honestly, those guys. As for property destruction, he does set the police car on fire, but again, this is one of those situations where it might not count, because he isn't doing it just for vibes. He's doing it because he wants to delete the dashcam footage of him and Dragona, so there's no evidence that they were even stopped by the police in the first place. Up next is theft, and I'd say he's a thief. The first time that we see him, he's riding in a stolen car, and right now he's helping steal a diamond that's worth $6 million, and he was actually excited to be a part of the heist to begin with. The last major rule-breaking behavior that he shows is drug dealing. Already illegal if you're not a pharmacist, but the fact that he's only a high schooler makes it even more wild to see. Before we wrap up, let's just cover a few more features that a person with conduct disorder might show. For starters, they might have a lack of remorse or guilt. Jodio shows this in his second confrontation with the dirty cops. Rather than feeling regret or concern about having almost killed them, he doubles down and says, "And I'll do it again." He actually wishes that he killed them when he had the chance, and he doesn't even care if guys like them live or die. Their existence means nothing to him. A few more designer shoe stomps to the face, and the JoJo brothers could have been wanted criminals. Next up, they might show a lack of empathy. When he briefly talks about the kid at his high school getting bullied, he does it in a very analytical way. Rather than feeling sorry for him, he just says the kid gets bullied because people don't respect him, and he'll probably end up dropping out of their school soon because his situation won't change. It could change if Jodio wanted it to. He has enough respect in his community to get kids to walk his mother to work so she doesn't get wet when it rains. He's even strong enough to stand up to the bullies, but instead, he kind of just makes the situation about himself when he admits that the two of them are similar. Then he just flexes on the guy even harder and says, "Do you see this chain? That could not be me." This isn't the only time that we see his ego at play either. When he's talking about mechanisms, he basically says his is a universal constant that specifically exists to make wealth flow to him. He makes sure that we know this is the story of how he gets rich, and says that if you don't think he sounds humble enough, you might as well just go kick rocks. The next feature is being unconcerned about performance. Jodio doesn't go to school to study, or even to make friends. He only goes because him being a drug dealer for his principal is part of his mechanism. Finally, we have a shallow or deficient affect. This basically means that he doesn't show his emotions or feelings to other people in ways that aren't superficial. We do see Jodio laughing and joking with Dragona about him bumping Dua Lipa too hard in the whip, but after that we don't really see him express too much other than anger and disdain for the dirty cops. In chapter 3, he shows concern over the success of the heist, but we've really only seen him in a situation or two where people would normally be emotionally vulnerable. The first is when Dragona hugs him for being protective, and his arms stay at his side and he doesn't hug back. The second is when his counselor tells him that he probably has antisocial and he doesn't react. He tells the reader that being told this kind of hurts him, but he only tells his mom and the counselor that he'll be careful. And in this situation, I think he means being careful of getting caught doing the stuff that he already does, because he clearly has no intention of stopping.
So did you know that you could perhaps kill somebody?
Yes, but I wanted to do hood rat stuff for my friend.
Jodio doesn't show concern for the law or rules at all. He just does whatever he wants as long as it works for him. I can't really think of anything that says I don't give a fuck more than him selling drugs in front of the Hawaiian Supreme Court. Obviously, he doesn't want to get caught, because that would be incredibly inconvenient, and his mom's life would go from being easy to hellish. But the idea of punishment is not enough to get Jodio to live life on the straight and narrow. Just like with most mental health conditions, ASPD and conduct disorder are caused by a combination of genetic and environmental factors. Jodio says that things between his parents were messy, and his father isn't even in the picture, so this makes me even more curious to see what his dad is actually like. In terms of environment, he lives in an area where he was able to be recruited to be a drug gopher at 11 years old, and now he's working for his principal doing the same thing with the occasional heist added to the job description. The main cast aside from him are a drug dealing klepto, a drug abusing klepto, and his brother, who is also a drug trafficker and a thief. The criminal behavior he shows could really just be attributed to his environment, because they also share some of his same behaviors. But the point being made in the story so far is that Jodio is different from them, at least in terms of how he expresses and experiences his emotions, and maybe even what emotions he's capable of feeling in the first place. It's things like this that make me appreciate this panel of him wondering whether or not he can be happy a whole lot more. We already know that this is the story of how he gets rich, but I hope he at least revisits this question when the story ends. Thanks for watching. Peace.